Hi, Jacob. Thanks for being with me today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, before we will start, would you mind to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah, so my name is Jacob O'Brien. I've, since this is a Clojure podcast, I'll start out saying I've started doing Clojure in 2019, or no, 2016 on side projects and then full time in 2019. Um, I started doing it full time as an entrepreneur, which I'm sure we'll talk about plenty. And so did entrepreneurship for like 4.5 years. And then about 2.5 years since that wasn't really working out, I joined a Clojure company. And so I've been writing Clojure in the clean energy space since then and still continuing to work
Interesting.
on my various projects on the side too.
All right, we will get to your job as well. So, you are well known in the community for two projects. One of them is Biff framework, and the second is Yakread.
Yeah.
So let's start with
I,
Biff. Yeah, go ahead.
sure. I don't know if I'd say I'm well known for Yakread, but Biff certainly.
So
Oh,
I think Biff is very well known. I would say it's
yeah.
top three well-known Clojure framework.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
of course, like first thing is it capitalizes on HTMX, which is extremely popular in Clojure community. Given the majority of Clojure developers are focused on backend,
Yeah.
so it
That's a good
makes
fit.
Clojure developers more productive, right?
Yeah, I
So
think it's a good fit.
I would like to ask you what was the original motivation for Biff?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, to just give kind of a brief historical overview. So as I mentioned, I was doing entrepreneurship, which was sort of a life goal that I'd had for a long time. You know, I got into reading Paul Graham essays as a teenager and found those to be very inspiring. So for a long time, I was thinking, okay, I want to do a startup. And so eventually started doing it full time, and I sort of ended up pivoting between various different ideas as one does. And so and also like I mentioned, that was my first time doing Clojure full time, just on my own.
Mhm.
And so I was very much um, gaining familiarity with the Clojure web ecosystem and just figuring out sort of from first principles, you know, how do I want to do web development in this ecosystem that doesn't have like one established way to do it already. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
yeah, so I sort of just, as I worked on a handful of different projects over time, I sort of just naturally converged on some approaches and things that I liked. And actually in the very initial iteration of Biff, it was much more experimental than I have now. I was into all the sort of real time sync and you know keeping the real time up to date with the backend and with like subscribable queries and things like that. And so I had this interesting ideas of how you could do that there. And anyway, so I had come across something that seemed novel
Yeah.
and interesting and useful, and so I thought, hey, this would be interesting to release and make it more
Yes.
usable. And so that was the first release, and it's evolved a lot since then. But
Yeah.
that's
I
the initial story.
If I remember correctly, your intention was to build multiple products, right? So was the intention of Biff to help you to prototype quickly, build something, like get something into version one really quick? Or was it more like that Biff was always the way how you were thinking about building web applications, no matter small or large?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I definitely said like I wasn't thinking, oh, I want to make myself faster, so I'm going to release a framework. It was more just like I was just making web apps and thought, hey, I could just spin this out into another project. Not because having it as a separate project would make me faster per se, but I don't know. It's just fun to release things in the community and have it be
Yeah.
used. So that was
And
more the
now there are
motivation.
people who use Biff, right? Is it
Yeah.
that you found that many Clojure developers are similar in their thinking of how applications should be made?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of diversity in the community, which is great. And there are people who use Biff and who like it, which is
Yeah.
awesome. Um, so yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think there are two big groups of Clojure developers. One
Hmm.
half does not want to touch front end
Right.
unless they have to, and this is where Biff probably excels. Then there are plenty of developers who are willing to work on the front end part, especially if they can work in Clojure script. And then for those, there are multiple options. There is a bigger variety in this space. Nowadays, it seems to me that developers are more and more working on backend again.
Hmm.
So there might be a renaissance of Biff and more
Yeah,
projects.
yeah. I agree. I mean, I do think a lot of people in the Clojure community tend to lean back end. And yeah, I think that is sort of like my one line description of HTMX is that it lets you create interfaces that are reasonably interactive while staying on the back end. So
Yeah,
you don't have the sort of distributed state problem. You're just writing plain Clojure all the time, which is fun.
yeah, absolutely. So for 4.5 years, you wanted to build a business, and later on,
Hmm.
you change direction a little bit, and you wrote an article, a great article, which I recommend. And you speak about certain categorization of how entrepreneur might innovate or might create products. And
Hmm.
you split people into scientists, inventors, entrepreneurs. Would you mind to tell more about the underlying thoughts and your experience?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the name of what is the name of that article? It's like let me just bring it up here really quick. Um, it's on the first page of my why. Yes, why to not be a startup founder. Not that you shouldn't be a startup founder, but some potential reasons to think about. But anyway, so to explain sort of the precursor, so as I so like I mentioned, being a startup founder, very long term goal I had, and very fired up about it for a long time. And so I got into it, and I was like, yes, I'm a startup founder, and the first 2 months of quitting your job and going into something like that full time is amazing because you just feel like, wow, I can do anything. This is amazing. And then sort of after that, reality starts to slowly
Yeah,
come in. At least that was my experience. Um, and you realize like, wow, I have no idea how to actually make this work. And long story short, after I don't know, maybe 2 years into it or so, I was starting to sort of have misgivings about it. Like I knew entrepreneurship would be hard. Like that, I mean, that was kind of the point. You don't want to just do something easy with your life, right? But I thought it would be hard and worth it, and it was
yeah,
starting to feel like it wasn't actually worth it. Like it wasn't a great use of my time or like
mhm,
my individual interests and abilities and talents and things. And so I was very much trying to figure this out and had this sort of vague malaise in my
yeah,
mind. And so then, anyway, I came across an article by someone named Jason Crawford, who is associated with the progress movement in the US. And anyway, he wrote an article about, let's see, it was called "We Need a Career Path for Invention," and I read it and it completely just knocked my socks off because he gave this framework where he came up, he explained that the categorization that you just mentioned of sort of partitioning areas of work into um, science on one end of the spectrum, and then on the far other end of the spectrum, you have business, which includes entrepreneurship. But then he focuses on, in the middle, you have this area that he calls invention, which is, it's not basic research. You're trying to build something useful. Like the goal is to build something, not
mm,
to learn something or to produce knowledge. But at the same time, you're not necessarily trying to build something that's commercializable right away. Like you're really
yeah,
just focusing on to build something useful, not make money with it. And so his point is that like that is a distinct endeavor from the business. And you know, some people might be interested in that more than business. And so when I realized that, I realized that's why I am not having a great time as an entrepreneurship or as an entrepreneur, because I think I don't actually care about building a business. I care about building cool stuff and building interesting
Yeah,
stuff, and you know. So anyway, so inventor, that's sort of I've come to identify as that myself since then. So yeah.
I agree. I agree completely. There might be some sort of there have been a change in the world for decades. The technologies, even when they were ugly, only for technologists, hard to use, and so on, they were always enabling new use cases, and people were hungry to use MS-DOS, for example, or first printers, which were so noisy it could make you deaf. And but people or companies, they needed those technologies. And people who were nerds, super focused on innovation, could build sustainable businesses, even when they weren't focused on marketing all that much. They didn't want to spend too much time with lawyers and accountants. Not that I hate lawyers and accountants. I don't, but I definitely spend more time with them than I would like to. And for many fields, it's now a solved problem. A to-do list is a solved problem. CRM is a solved problem. HR management software is a solved problem. And you need marketing, not a product, to succeed. And if you are an inventor and you want to unlock those new use cases, you have to choose verticals where technology is demanded, no matter if it's really useful or not, which is increasingly more difficult.
Yeah.
Especially for a small team of 1 or 2 people.
Yeah. I'd agree. There's certainly a high bar, and in fact, I think Jason Crawford actually has had sort of the same experience. I didn't read up too much into his backstory, but I think he was also into entrepreneurship before he got into this whole sort of progress studies movement. And I believe he was working on some sort of productivity software, like a task like Asana type thing, Jira. And he found that, you know, just the bar for what people expect now, just you know, UX and things like that is just so high.
Yeah.
Just to reach baseline is just a lot of effort, and that's not even getting to the like implementing whatever new idea you had about it was sort of thing. So
Yeah, absolutely. And even before AI, there have been a lot of no-code solutions where you could build your own customized, for example, to-do lists or CRMs in Airtable, Notion, and tools like that. So it was even more difficult to compete in this market when for a few dollars per month you can build your own to-do list that works how you want to. And and now with AI, people, like, all simple tools are just a prompt away. And with tools like Lovable, you can even make those things visually. You don't need to test it. You don't need to understand how programming works. Of course, larger systems are very different. It will take many years till we will see, for example, vibe-coded CAD software. And these have probably millions of lines of code. So there is a reason. But for those small things like to-do lists, no, there is no business in this. So besides Clojure and Biff, your second specialization are recommender systems.
yeah, for recommendation systems.
And you work on multiple, right? So how
Mhm.
did you get to it? What attracts you on those?
Sure, yeah. So I mean, the very earliest way I got into recommender systems was basically that I was really into music.
Mhm.
As a teenager, I was just listening to music all the time, um, and discovered most of my music through Pandora, um,
Mhm.
which is one of these music recommender systems basically, and also used Spotify a little bit, and that was great at first because it introduced me to all this music, a lot of bands that I still listen to, but it sort of got stale pretty quickly, and so I got interested in this problem of like, you know, it doesn't seem like I could make a better algorithm than this. Like it doesn't seem that smart, and so for a long time I had been thinking like, oh, like maybe I can make my own music recommenders thing, and so that was one of the that was the first recommender system that I made. It wasn't the first thing I was working on as an entrepreneur, but about maybe 8 months in, I had pivoted. Whatever I was working on before wasn't really working out, and so I thought, hey, maybe I'll try this music thing as a business. So I for about 6 months then I worked on a music recommender app. It was very interesting. Sadly, no longer running. But had some interesting ideas there, and ended up deciding that it was not a great area to build a business in.
Yeah.
For one thing, just like licensing for music is a big pain. A lot of work also if you're trying to build an actual music app, which I was trying to do
Mhm.
because I wanted to have the app and have the algorithm built right in. Anyway, so I decided to pivot. At that point, I pivoted over to um, a recommender system for, let's see. Okay, I think the next one was like a recommender system for anything. So you could put like articles or movies or books or whatever. And because I had, while I was working on the music one, I remember one day I sort of had this like epiphany or this vision,
Yeah.
and I thought like, whoa, why don't we have like a totally general purpose recommender system, just like
Yeah.
search engine like Google. You don't have a search engine for books and another one for
Yeah.
XYZ. You just have Google, right? And you just search for stuff. And I thought like, why don't we
Mhm.
have some like a recommendation system? Like then you don't even have to search for stuff, and it would just show you stuff. And
Sure.
so anyway, so I got into that. I should wrap up this before I go on too long of a tangent. But anyway, worked on that for a while. Also decided didn't quite work, and so I thought, okay, maybe I should niche down a little bit, and then got into recommender systems for long form content.
Yeah.
Like I built one for like blog posts and essays, and then pivoted to a different one for newsletters, which was kind of the first thing that actually sort of got a decent amount of traction. At one
Mhm.
point, I built this newsletter recommender system um, that was making a couple $1,000s in revenue per month at one point. Um, Also, didn't quite work eventually because retention just wasn't very good. So then I pivoted to a reading app. So again, focused on reading things on the internet, and then I got a
Yeah.
job.
So because you needed probably people to spend more time in your app to improve retention and increase perceived value, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, the core problem. So the newsletter recommender system is called the sample, um, and the nice thing about it is that there are lots of people. For example, thanks to Substack and other companies in that space, there are lots of people who have newsletters and are trying to do it as their own little business or side hustle
Mhm.
or something. And so they're also willing to pay to advertise their newsletter. And so that's
Yeah.
how the sample made money, is that a portion of the recommendations were advertisements. And so it got a lot of interest from publishers, actually.
Mhm.
Um, and through that I was also able, like some of them would give shout outs and things, and so I also got on the reader side got a decent number of subscribers. But the core problem it had is that the entire product was built around introducing you to new newsletters, but the idea was
Mhm.
that once it it showed you when you liked, you would subscribe, and then you would go on the regular email list, and so the sample would not be an intermediary in that relationship. So it was, which is, I explicitly wanted to do that because a big thing I like about newsletters is that it's email, it's an open protocol. You don't have a platform that's acting as a gatekeeper, right? But the downside of that approach is that having a product that is solely focused on discovery just makes it very hard to retain users long term, because once you use it and you find a few newsletters you subscribe to, you don't necessarily need to find another newsletter every single week, right?
Of
and
course.
So it was just, eventually everyone churned. There was, with retention, you generally want to have, like, if you graph their attention, you'll have sort of a curve, and you want the curve to flatten out, I don't know, at least 5, 10, or even 20% or something. And that's like how many people keep using your app long term. Whereas if the curve for the sample was just was linear until it hit the x-axis and everyone turns. So, yeah.
Because you don't want to be subscribed to more and more newsletters, because you have just that amount of time in a day to read. So at certain point, if you don't have better newsletters to offer, and people would allow one new and unsubscribe another one, they already have the best newsletters, and all other newsletters you might offer might be suboptimal and comparatively waste of time, right?
Yeah, could be.
Unless you always find new newsletters that are even better than the previous one.
Yeah,
which is
certainly diminishing returns, right?
Yeah. How do recommender systems work internally?
I mean, in general, there are a whole bunch of different ways. There are sort of two main, very high-level approaches you can do. One of them is known as collaborative filtering, and the other is content-based filtering or content-based modeling. And so collaborative filtering is it's like people who like X also like Y. You don't care what is X, what is Y. You're just looking at correlations between users who have some overlap and things that they like. And then content-based modeling is you are trying to actually build some kind of model for the things you're recommending. So, for example, maybe you extract some features from the content somehow, like mentioned Pandora. So they have the Music Genome Project, where they would have people listen to these songs and assign like a numerical value or something for one of, I don't know how many, like 300 features, or I have no idea how many features, and so you have these like features that you can then train a machine learning model, and then you can do recommendations that way. So most of if not all of the recommender systems I have built have been focused on collaborative filtering. So you have that sort of base model at the core of it. But then you have a lot of stuff that's more domain specific that you layer on top.
Yeah.
And that's what I tended to spend most of my time thinking about. And it's also very interesting to think about, because you're thinking about
so if it's not content based, like when it's content based, you basically need to take your data. Like it's a long form, it's about beekeeping, it's USA specific, for example.
Yeah.
While for collaborative filtering, you need a couple of likes. You show a couple of examples. Like when you onboard people to the system, you show them a sample of everything that's available or a bunch of things. They give you a couple of likes, and you start categorizing people to others who like similar things.
Yeah. And I mean, with both models, you might start out with that sort of approach of like, showing people some content and seeing how they react to it. But the way you use it is different. So so like you said, with collaborative filtering, you would say, oh, like, okay, you liked X, Y, and Z, and now let's find other people who like X, Y, and Z and see what they liked. Whereas with content-based modeling, you're saying, oh, they liked these articles, and it's an article about beekeeping, so let's show them more
Yeah.
beekeeping articles.
Yes, yes. But when you find it's USA specific, you might say, okay, you are based in the USA, so I will be showing you things that are relevant to USA, not to Nepal, for example.
Yeah.
Are there any existing libraries or frameworks that make it easier to build recommender systems?
Oh yeah. You can, and there are a bunch of different libraries and things. Some of them are built more for academic usage. So, for example, one that I started out using was a Python library called Surprise, which is more more meant for like writing papers and things. So you'd run it on data sets and get statistics on the error and things. But I mean, there's no reason you can't also use it in production, which is what I did. And the one that I'm using now, and the one product Yakread that is still running, is a Java lib. So Spark, there's part of Spark, they have ML lib, and it has a collaborative filtering model baked in. So it's just very off the shelf. You just have to come up with a list of ratings, basically.
Yeah.
So you say, here's an item ID, and then a user ID, and then some sort of numerical value for how much this user likes this item. And you give it and then it does all the fancy number stuff. And then you get a function where then you can then give it an item and a user, and it will tell you, okay, what is the predicted rating for this pair?
Yes. And then you can order by rating. Even like, for example, do not show things I have shown 3 times already, but
yes. There and there's so much work that goes into that because you need a lot more than just the core collaborative filtering model to make a good recommender system. And so that's one of it, is like freshness. Have we recommended this thing to this person before, or variety, like have we recommended this type of thing to this user before, or things like that. Or another big one is popularity bias, which is, have we recommended this thing to other users before? Because if you don't put in controls for that, generally what will happen is your recommender system will end up recommending a few items to everyone.
To everybody.
They'll just be like sort of generic popular things. Like, I don't know, like if you're doing music, probably a lot of Taylor Swift, that kind of thing. And so that's a lot of also what I focused on, is finding ways to, rein that in a bit.
I can imagine that 20% of items will get 80% of views and likes and so on. Maybe because it has been written, or the content has been made for much wider population, so it will be more relevant even when it's not that innovative, which leads to a question. Sometimes you might want to show things that are a bit niche. So what makes a good recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, it's and that's totally true. Like, how niche do you want to make your recommendations, and where is the balance? Because I mean, if everything you recommend is the super obscure long tail thing, most people probably just won't be interested. so there's, I mean, and nothing that I've done with Yakread or my other recommendations is extremely complicated. That was always sort of, I was basically thinking like, okay, let's get sort of a baseline recommender system that kind of does okay. And then once I actually get something with traction that's growing, then maybe I can focus on that a lot. And I just never got to that part. So yeah, nothing extremely complex. But that is just that question of like, what makes a good recommendation? I think that is one of the things that interests me the most about recommendation, because there isn't necessarily an easy answer to that question. It's not objective. Like if, I don't know, say if you are working on an ML classifier, there is an objective answer to, is this picture a bird or not, right? Whereas like, you know, what is the right item to recommend to this user is not clear cut at all. And so, there's a very prevalent human factor to when you are working on recommendation. And that just makes it a very engaging problem to think about, I think.
You could potentially ask users after the session to order the items based on like how much they enjoyed the recommendation, which I guess not many people would want to do, or you could somehow track the behavior of your users. Because if it's going to be too mainstream, they already know those articles. If you niche down too much, you might hit a complete, like great articles that will be super innovative, or it might be very irrelevant. For example, so in large language models, you know, there is a temperature setting where you can set up how creative it's supposed to be. There is no creativity involved in this. The temperature is implemented in a way where for each token it generates, it can actually generate multiple tokens. If you set the temperature to 0, it will always give you the token with the highest probability. And the higher is the temperature, the bigger sample it takes. So it takes 2, 3, 4, 5, let's say most probable characters or tokens, and randomly chooses one of them. So it is basically picking tokens that it sees as suboptimal, but they might be surprising. So in a similar way, you might, when you get those scores, increasing temperature is adding randomness of those choices, and there might be some constant where it is creative or innovative just enough. And you can play with that.
I mean, it sounds in general. So there's a concept in machine learning of exploration versus exploitation. Which is you know, the idea that you want to give, so exploration, you want your system to learn. So with recommender systems, like you want to recommend new items that haven't been recommended before, and so you can learn about it and find, okay, who does like this thing. But then exploitation, you also want to, you know, not just always explore, because then people will just not get enough things that they actually like. And so you have to find the balance, and it is very, like, I have noticed also, like there certainly are knobs in the recommender systems I've worked on that you know, you could surface like a parameter for exploration, like how much do you want this to explore, how much to exploit.
These are important also, not to end up in a local optimum. You want to find all of those, like when you have somebody with interest, no matter if it's music or blog posts or newsletters, you will not find a person who is interested in only one thing. So somebody who is interested in medieval music might be also interested in brewing beer and old-fashioned, or for example Latin, and finding different things that are somehow related but not immediately, not just one step off, might require this building certain momentum and jumps around to find out what people react to, what they also like. But of course, the more you jump around, the more misses you will make.
So it's a balance, of course.
It might be also self-driven, like social networks nowadays, they have those like explore tabs, which are recommending things that are off beaten path, more different. And then your like algorithmic algorithm, which is often things you already reacted to, things you follow, and people you follow react to, for example.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a good point, because there's like a large part of recommender system design too really is the UX. It's not just the algorithm. It's just, you know, how is this person interacting with this system, and so that is a great example. You know, you can have different parts of the UI that are focused on exploration and exploitation. I remember back when TikTok was, you know, the new hotness and everyone was talking about it. I remember reading some things about how, like someone was saying they asked some professor about, you know, the recommendation algorithm at TikTok or something, and he was saying, you know, they're really not doing anything that special. Like it's kind of just, you know, standard state of the art recommendation stuff. But what other people, you know, that I've read were talking about it was that really the magic in TikTok was the UI, was just, you know, the user interaction of, you know, show a video and find out, do they skip or whatever, and other parts of the UI, especially related to, you know, how the, you know, both sides of the market. So you've got people who are watching the videos and people who are producing the videos, and so there are ways for people producing the videos to sort of tap into, you know, what is trending or whatever and things like that. And so there's just this whole system beyond, like you're not just in this fixed area of like, okay, here are my inputs and how do I find out the outputs, you know?
Yeah. At the same time, I think those algorithms like TikTok will be a mixture of collaborative filtering with content filtering, right?
Oh
Because
yeah, everything's a mixture now. They call them ensembles.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I have read that, for example, many things, even like captions, everything can matter, but also those algorithms, when you upload a new thing, they will show it to a couple of people. And if people watch it and like it, it will explode and it can go exponentially up in views. But
Yeah.
if 2 or 3 of your videos flop, they might stop showing you completely. And it might be better to start a new account and start over, because you have algorithmically, you damaged your reputation, the system.
Yeah.
So people creators are hacking those algorithms by doing plenty of those things. However, your focus is not short video; it's more long form articles as of now, right?
Yes.
Is it something that you do to, for example, break from those like social networks are nowadays focused a lot on like quick dopamine hits, while long form articles, especially uh, evergreen, something that you read and it helps you to for the rest of your life. Is that something you focus on to help others, to help yourself, or what's the reason why you focus on long form content now?
Yeah. So the the backstory for my current project that's still running, Yakread, is when I started having the idea to work on it, my first daughter was, I don't know, probably a year old or something. Anyway, I was spending a lot of time just feeding her
Yeah,
when she was still bottle fed, right? I'm sure you're familiar with that. Um,
sure.
and I had sort of a lot of time to do something on my phone, and I ended up, you know, reading Twitter, as one does. And I just felt like I was, you know, wasting my life. I mean, not wasting my life,
Yeah,
but, you know, all this time, like it really is just you know, the information equivalent of fast food. And so I was thinking, like, you know, it would be nice if I had an application that made it as easy to sit down and read something a little more substantial than just tweets, right? Because also, again, like as a parent, I don't generally have long blocks of time to just say, oh, I'm going to sit down and read this thing for 2 hours. Like it's very much, oh, I've got like 7.5 minutes to read something while I'm watching my kids, and my energy level is typically not very high. and so I really wanted something that had that, just the ease of Twitter, in the sense of like, the amount of the activation energy to use it was just extremely low. And so I was thinking, could I do something like that for blog posts and newsletters, where it's easy to get into, but it also feels more edifying, and you feel like, wow, like that was a good use of time, as opposed to just like rotting my brain or something,
Yeah, I think it's good to be an example for your kids. So when they would see you a lot watching a TikTok, and one day they might get their own phone and would ask you, but Daddy, you are stopping us from using TikTok or watching YouTube shorts, but you are doing the same thing. And this might be a good example of I deleted all social networks on my phone. I stopped going to most of the social networks. I never had TikTok. My colleagues convinced me to download it, and I deleted it after 30 minutes. I do other things to be a good example for my kids, eating lots of vegetables, don't drink, don't smoke, no drugs in front of them or anywhere else, because they remember. Maybe when they are 1 year old, they don't, but one day they will remember. Is there a plan, or how would Yakread for kids look like?
Yeah, I mean, no concrete plans at the moment per se. Like I mentioned, the algorithm right now is very basic. But at some point in the future, it would be interesting to get more into fancier recommendation techniques like that. And so, to some extent, it might just happen naturally, because, if they find, because again, with collaborative filtering, it doesn't necessarily need to know, oh, this is a kid's article. But, if you read an article, if the kid finds an article about something that they like, then, maybe the system can find more things that they like. And you could potentially have ways to focus on that particular use case a little bit more. Like content-based modeling in general would be something interesting to get to. And that's actually, be interested to use LLMs for that, since they seem to be good at that kind of thing. I've done a small amount of attempting to model like the actual topics of articles, and did not have a whole ton of success with it, honestly. I was using kind of a basic technique called TF-IDF, which that's a keyword extraction method. So you can have a corpus of a whole bunch of documents, and then it can say, okay, based on this corpus, like here are, the top 5 most distinct keywords from this article, and then it'll normalize. It won't just say like, what are the 5 most common words in this document, because then it'll just be like and the and things like that. So anyway, so I ran TF-IDF on all these things, and then put it in let's see, fast text, which is Facebook's a library to say, okay, now take some words and turn them into feature vectors and things. So anyway, so I've experimented with that kind of thing, and did not get awesome results. But so anyway, so LLMs might actually work. I guess the struggle there is, I don't know if, like, it's great if you have, you're reading one document and you say, hey, can you read this and tell me some stuff about it? But if you have a database of, 100,000 articles, and you want to say, okay, now classify all these for me, like, I don't know, just financially, is that feasible or not?
So I think LLMs might be phenomenal, but there is an issue. For example, when you have a long form article and you want to find out what's really the most important thing, or how to categorize, how to put it on some ontology, what matters for every individual user. many years ago, I was using Blinklist, which is an app where you can read a book distilled into 5 pages of text. And I thought it's really great until I tried going through books I have read already.
Oh.
And I have my notes. I remember my takeaways. I have plenty of books where I write a lot into those books and make a lot of notes on the inner shelf. And then when I saw what Blinklist considered the most important thing and what I did, it was completely different thing. So in those like 400 pages distilled to 5, it was completely different 5 that would help me in any way.
Very
So
interesting.
so with LLMs, they will have a hard time telling you, is this article worth reading? This is what you will learn because it doesn't know where you are and what you are looking for. Sometimes the same book can give you 2 different things at different life stages.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah, I think you definitely have to figure out, what is a good use case for LLMs and what is not a good use case, and so summarizing, maybe not, I don't know, depends on the context. As far as maybe if you're just using it to just extract some topics, maybe that's a
yeah,
little bit more reliable. So you're not trying to get it to give you more of a high level takeaway, but just say like, what is this thing even about? Like maybe we can at least agree on that, hopefully.
yeah. Another thing is that this distillation might also lose a bit of the style. So, for example, now during the Christmas, so we got, for my kids, we got classics, like classic books, classics for
Yes.
kids, simplified, abridged versions, and there were Bronte sisters, Russian authors. So they were 9 and 10. I was torturing them with Chekhov, Dostoevsky, and others. But again, like when you know those books, when you read Chekhov, and not in original, I don't know any Russian, but even in English, the book, and then you read the simplified book, the simplified book will have absolutely nothing from that literal style, absolutely nothing of the arc that's happening sometimes over. For example, Chekhov is writing short stories, so over dozens of pages. With other authors, it might be hundreds of pages, and they not just shorten it to 50 pages, but they also remove the author's style.
Yeah.
So you no longer get the feeling of reading the author. You just get a summary which you can use in the school to pretend that you have actually read the book.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, so sometimes I use LLMs to create those notes, but very often it serves more like, is it worth for me to open it and read the whole thing?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's a good way to use it.
it's yeah. At the same time, there are many authors who want to waste the reader's time
Yeah,
and who turn something into 10 pages, what could be 1 or 2 pages. The whole
that's true.
self-help and business, but not economics books. The books you can buy in airports, exactly this type, could be a longer blog post very often.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, that's kind of another reason I'm very interested in articles, blog posts type things, because in a lot of cases, I think that really is the optimal format for information.
Yeah,
I think tweets are too short. I think it's very
yeah,
hard to write meaningful stuff in that short of a format. but then, on the other end, books, a lot of times, like you're just saying, sometimes they're too long. Whereas
Yeah.
articles, it's just, you don't have an incentive to try to make an article a certain length. Like generally, the shorter is the better, but you can still make it as long as you need it to be. So I really enjoy those a lot.
And
Supplemented by good books.
Still blog posts. There is a huge range. You can go from 500 words to 10,000 words in extreme cases.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not 100,000 words and be a book. And it's not just 2-3 sentences and a tweet. Yeah, the blog post is great because of the variability of the medium. So as of now, there are no LLMs in Yakread.
No.
No.
Not yet. Not yet. Might be a while.
Not yet, but might be. Besides Yakread, you said that you are working on green energy space.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you build?
Sure. Yeah. So the company I work at is called Taiba Energy. Taiba.ai. They've got a very fancy landing page. You can go look at it. But what we do is we make optimization software primarily for battery storage facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So if you follow the energy industry, you might be aware of this trend of, this trend of batteries, and these are very large batteries that utility scale batteries that are plugged into the grid, and they pair very well with renewable energy sources like solar, particularly, because solar energy is very cheap now, but it's variable because you can't necessarily control, when is the sun going to shine, right? And when the sun is shining the most, it does not necessarily line up with when most people are using the most energy, right? And so as renewable energy has become more prevalent, the benefit of batteries is skyrocketing, basically. So you can you can store energy when the sun is shining and then use it later when you need to. And so now, and then also, like, as batteries are becoming more prevalent, their energy markets are becoming more sophisticated. And there are, so for example, there's not actually just one energy market. If you have, a battery, there are actually there's a day ahead market where everyone decides, 24 hours in advance, okay, I want to pay this much for this amount of energy and blah, blah, blah. But then there's the real time market on top of that, where you can then make more adjustments, and you have these things called ancillaries, where you are paid to have just to have energy in case there's like a demand spike or something. So if there's an emergency and then the grid operator says, oh, we need a bunch of extra energy right now, then you'll get paid just to have it, just in case, even if you don't actually end up being called on to discharge. So anyway, this is a long explanation, but basically energy markets are complicated. And so what we do is we make a product that tells you what you should do with your battery. So you plug it in, or plug in our app into your battery, so we can monitor and say, okay, you have this much energy, and then we do all this fancy machine learning stuff and optimization stuff, and we say, okay, you should charge here, you should discharge here, and here's how much you should bid for energy, those kinds of things.
It's sort of automated arbitrage.
Yeah.
With batteries. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's based on Clojure.
Part of it. The web app, the front end, basically, which is the part that I work on, is based on Clojure. The back end is all Python. So which is kind of interesting, because like we were mentioning before, how Clojure people seem to be mostly backend people. Yeah. And so I feel like it's more common to have maybe a Clojure backend and then maybe a JavaScript front end or something. We actually have the reverse, where we have two products. So our main product now, which is actually the younger one, it's a Clojure script front end, uses Fulcro, and the back end is a bunch of Python services, and there's part of that is a GraphQL API
Yeah.
that which works out pretty well with Fulcrum. So I work on that, and then we have other teams who are on Python and who actually know how to do machine learning and optimization and things like that.
I wanted to ask about Biff in the in the stack. So, but
Not
by
yet, but
using
maybe
the
2026
future,
goals.
yes, yes. However, by using different libraries, different dev stack, was there anything you have learned and you would do differently in Biff if you were remaking Biff from scratch?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing is Pathum. So Pathum is a Clojure library that lets you structure your application as a graph. It's sort of a high-level, vague way to say it, but it makes it easy to pull apart all the different pieces of application logic in a way that makes it easy to understand at a large level. And I feel like from working on my own side my own side projects, I found that at the point when they got to around say 10,000 lines of code, they really started to get a little hairy.
Yeah.
You've got all these functions, and you say, okay, this function takes in a user object, but it needs to have these relations filled in and this nested data, and this other function needs this other slightly format, and there's a lot to keep track of and figure out, okay, what exactly is the format? This function needs something, and Pathum basically fixes that problem. So it helps a lot to keep code bases easier to reason about and easier to unit test as they grow larger. And so that is actually sort of something that is in progress. Like, I don't know if I will ever have the default Biff app use Pathum directly, because there is a learning curve associated with it.
Yeah.
And since Biff is focused on solo developers, and so a lot of, for example, if you're just making like a weekend project that's going to be like 500 lines, you don't really need Pathum. And I don't think forcing Biff users to learn Pathum would necessarily be in their benefit. But if you're building something long-term that's going to keep growing, I think it's huge. And so, for example, Yakread, I have totally rewritten the code base to use Pathum, and it's wonderful. And I've also rewritten it to do a whole bunch of other stuff. So anyway,
the way you describe it, it sounds a lot like dependency injection, actually. Yeah,
actually, one of the ways that I think of it as data-oriented dependency injection. I like it a lot more than, say, like the heavily object-oriented version of dependency injection that I've used in the past, where it's like, oh, this class needs an instance of this class, and you're trying to write a unit test, and you say, okay, I have to get an instance of this class, and then you go to that one, and that class says, oh, well, I need an instance of this class, and you're kind of following down this rabbit hole until you finally get the thing you want. Whereas with Pathum, they're called resolvers. It's just data. It's just whatever it needs. It's just going to be some nested hash map, basically, and so you never have to go down the same rabbit holes. And so it does make testing very nice.
Very nice, yeah. And sometimes it might be really needed. I know that when I wanted to write tests and it would be too difficult, I turn functions that did not to be higher order functions into higher order functions, and provided those dependencies, for example, for destructive functions. So I could replace them with testable ones, for instance, to make things easier. So what about working with databases? Is there anything which you have learned and which you would do differently?
So that's the other huge sort of project I've been working that I'm still in progress on now. So Biff uses XTDB by default, and XTDB2, which is a complete re-architecture, was finally entered general availability, I think last July-ish or maybe June or something. So I've been rewrite. So I rewrote the whole thing to use Patham and use some other approaches I was working on. And then after that, I immediately started rewriting all the database parts to use a different database. So I've spent the past year and a half basically just refactoring this app.
Refactoring the stuff.
It'd be nice to finally get to the point where I can write some new features. But anyway, so I've almost finished this whole, XTDB1 to XTDB2 migration. And so that will be the next public release that comes up for Biff, is to then have that all that support brought into the actual Biff thing, and so people can upgrade if they want or not. They can at least have XTDB2 for new projects. And then I got a bunch of other experimental approaches that I've been trying out in Yakread that I will then also start bringing into Biff and do a bunch more releases.
What are best practices to work with XTDB2?
Well, a big difference from XTDB1 is that SQL is now first class in XTDB2, which is huge. Even if you prefer Datalog, which I think probably many of us do in the Clojure community, to me, I think one of the most interesting things about XTDB is that I feel like it has a great shot of going reasonably mainstream, which I think would be huge to have, a mainstream immutable database. So even SQL versus Datalog, they're both fine. Like, to me, it's kind of potato, but sort of the system level effects are very interesting to me for that. So anyway, so going back, so your question was like any best practices, like how do you go about using it? So yeah, as far as queries, it's just SQL. So if you know SQL, there's that. I have built in Honey SQL support, so you don't have to write your queries as a bunch of strings. You write them as data structures, just as you would with Datomic or XTDB1, and so that's really nice. Differences is then, of course, XTDB2 is schemaless, just like XTDB1 is. So that's one of the things Biff adds, is it's got a bunch of Mali schema support baked into, so you can define schemas that way. Other than that, there are some differences with recommended way to generate ID, for example, generating IDs for your documents. So one of the things with XTDB2 is that it's recommended to have, if you have related records, you want the IDs for those records to have a common prefix so that they will be located in the same object storage block. Because like with XTDB1, for example, like all of the indexing was local. So you'd have the entire document store just all local. Whereas XTDB2 now, it's more cloud focused. So you've got all these object blobs in S3, and then it'll pull things down as needed. So anyway, so there's some other tweaks that you generally need to do to make sure you get.
And when you design the database, do you think it's better with databases like XTDB1 or 2? Is it better to try to achieve third normal form, or to have like denormalized database based on selects, based on how you need to get your data?
I think it's a mix. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, we do need queries that run fast, which has been kind of the bane of my existence working on these recommender systems, because they are very query intensive, even without having, like Yakread has, I don't know, maybe 30 active users, but still just the amount of data that it generates, from people's RSS feeds is just huge. And so yeah, and that is, I think, that's one of the big, open problems right now is how do we structure our databases and things in a way that is performant, but also that you can still understand and it's not going to be bug prone and things. And so there's lots of interesting stuff in this space. like Rama, obviously. A lot of people in the Clojure community are familiar with that. Um, there's a product called Feldera also, which is it's basically like makes materialized views out of your SQL queries.
Yeah.
And so, and I even had an experimental approach with XTDB1 that I was trying out in Yakread. I decided to abandon it because it ended up being kind of complex in the bad Clojure way.
Yeah.
But it was basically like it would let you just index the XTDB1 transaction log and make your own key value indexes based on that. Anyway, so very much an open problem, and that is actually the very next thing on my list. Is I just finished migrating all of the code for Yakread over to XTDB2, and I'm in the process of now migrating all of the data from XTDB1 into XTDB2, and then I will be going through queries and finding ones that are too slow and figuring out what should I do. So, do I need to restructure the data and store it differently, or do I need to bring in Rama or Feldera or do something, make my own index somehow? I don't know.
For a long time, I think the approach to databases was always achieve third or higher normal form, build analytic views on top to make your queries simpler, but keep all data in one place. And then hardware has got much cheaper, but we have started storing all the data in Kafka, for example, and now it's often easier to replay the history and build a new materialized view for any data. Yeah, Rama is based on this. However, Rama is designed for companies who want to scale to millions of users. So you have to do those things anyway. But when you are Google, you know that you have to treat your data differently than a small startup, for example. So, but yeah, both approaches are 100% relevant and functional. They all work. It's just what works better for what size of the application. How do you decide how to steer Biff? Like what to add and what should be in, what shouldn't be there?
Yeah, and I mean it is largely related to what you were just saying. Excuse me, where companies of different sizes need different things, and Biff is very much focused on, it's explicitly focused on the solo developer use case, right? And so there are sort of three different factors or potential users for Biff. So one is myself, because the whole original motivation for Biff is just it's a framework that I want to use, and so oftentimes that is kind of the tiebreaker too, when I'm like, okay, should I do this thing or not? And it's like, well, what do I want for my own apps? And that's what I'll do. And if other people like it, great. And if not, well, too bad. Make your own framework. But then, then the other use case is people who are not me, but are also solo developers. Maybe they're working on side projects. Maybe they're working on entrepreneurial projects or contracting gigs. Who knows? And then the third potential use case is people on a team. I don't know if there are many or any people using Biff on a team.
Yeah.
But it is. I'm not necessarily solely concerned with solo developers. I think it would be great if Biff could be used for larger projects and companies, and I can get lots of consulting clients maybe or something. I don't know, but that use case takes a bit of a backseat to the solo developer use case. So like I was mentioning with Pathom, and that's actually an interesting example, because that Pathom is something that I actually do want for myself, but it's all just trade-offs and weighing, is the benefit bigger than the cost? And again, for solo developers who have not already learned Pathom, working on small things, I don't know if it really makes sense And so with this database normalization, materialized view things, similarly, it's, I will likely need something in my own applications, but I also think that's somewhat um, idiosyncratic, since I'm working on recommender systems, and most people are not.
Mhm.
And so, maybe just plain XTDB2 without anything added on top is totally fine for the default use case. And so that might just be what it is. And then I have, so sort of Biff's, quote unquote extension mechanism is basically just documentation, how-to guides. I have a
Yeah,
handful of how-to guides. And so this might be a great use case for how-to guides. So I'll say, okay, if you are building something and you're dealing with query performance, here's some techniques that work pretty good with Biff.
yeah. I've spent many years learning and also speaking and teaching frameworks. It was a long time ago, long before I started with Clojure.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say, there is like a common core of things you always need, right?
Yeah.
User identities, working with HTTP requests, building responses, templating, security, database connections. But then there is always some like problem solving. It's not, the framework is not only a set of libraries, but it's also a mindset.
Yeah.
Some frameworks are significantly more opinionated and try to integrate things together, like Ruby on Rails. When you when you save a form in the right format, it will automatically validate, and if the control is there, it will automatically save data in the database and redirect you to a list of whatever you are saving,
Mm-hmm.
which actually once led to a massive security error that you could
Yeah.
submit post like attributes that were in the database but they're not in the form. But Rails wasn't checking
Oh.
because form was just HTML helpers. It
Oh, wow.
wasn't checking that the form really exists. And then you had other frameworks, like, for example, in PHP, Zen framework,
Mm-hmm.
which removed all items from the request that were not in the original form. So it was more writing. You had to define the object for form, but it wasn't
Yeah.
prone to this security bug.
Yeah.
So as a framework designer, you always have to balance and be intentional, right? Balance out if you are making things default and there is a little bit of magic in it, which might help a lot or backfire, or you are more explicit, which might lower your productivity but might improve how deliberate the behavior of your application is. So, how do you think? Like, what's your what's Jacob's way of building applications? How do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's, um, I, I try a couple approaches and think about it and decide on one. I, it's hard sometimes to give a more general approach than that. Cause it really is very, what's the word? It's a lot of tacit knowledge.
Yeah,
It's not necessarily like a list of steps like, oh, I just follow this checklist and see if it checks all the boxes, then it goes in Biff, right? And honestly, that's one of the things that I think makes working on a framework very enjoyable. Is it, a little bit similar to the whole recommender system where it's got this large human component. With Biff, it's totally the same. As I'm not just working on some, say, like a backend system, and my goal is to increase its throughput by 5% or something. Like it's all about the humans.
yeah,
Whenever I'm working on Biff, it's all just, is this going to be straightforward for someone to understand, or is it going to lead them down a wrong path and they have to, like, is there going to be a foot gun? Are they going to have to remember, oh, make sure you do this and not this? And so I try to stay cognizant of that a lot. And sometimes that does lead me um, to not trying to hide things,
Yeah.
which is, that's, it's a balancing act, because I want to, make this framework that's easy to use, easy and simple, but you want to make it easy, but you don't want to sacrifice the simplicity, right? And so I often think about, okay, can I abstract this in a way that is going to be a good abstraction that will be usable, and people won't have to understand what it's doing underneath, and if not, then I don't even try. So like for example, something that I just ran into a couple of days ago I mentioned with XTDB2, there are some new best practices around your primary keys for documents. You want to have them prefixed with certain things. And so for a little bit, I was trying an approach where Biff would try to do that automatically for you. And I did not find a good way to do it. I got into it and I realized, I implemented it, and I realized, like, it works like 95% of the time, but then it's still like, oh, well, but if you're doing this thing, then this automatic thing won't work. And so you have to remember to do it yourself. And if you're going to have to remember to do it yourself sometimes, I'd rather people just always do it themselves. And so they always know they need to do that.
Yes. Leaky abstraction, right? Yeah. So when I was designing Flexiana framework, our internal framework, one of the underlying principles we have is code is code, data is data. Do not make data executable, because in Clojure it's very easy to make your data executable and turn your code into data, which is fine. We treat code as a data quite often, but I banned my colleagues from building some configuration, maybe nested lists or vectors, and then somehow evaluating it. If it's a code, pass a function or expression. Do not pass a data structure, because we would end up building an interpreter within Clojure, which is much better than anything we would build ourselves. So we have this principle: code is code, data is data. So you can't turn data into code.
That makes sense.
And this removes the whole category of like abstractions you might want to do that would force you to build your own interpreter, which is what you don't want to do when you have full power of Clojure at hand.
That's interesting. So question, would if Hiccup didn't already exist, like, is Hiccup, would that be an example of one of these DSLs?
Yeah. So generally for Hiccup, the rule is, but I don't say that all of my colleagues always do this by how I defined it, but when you need to dynamically build a query, use HoneySQL. Otherwise, just write a query, put it into a string. But my colleagues, they like seeing the query as a data structure. Even when they write a query in something like DataGrip or pgadmin, then they turn it into HoneySQL. So then Clojure can turn it back to string, just to feel that it's more idiomatic, even, but it might not be. But they like it. But for example, one thing they liked, and I banned them from doing that in Flexiana, it's an MVC framework, but it has very powerful middlewares, super powerful middlewares. And I found out that my colleagues started like pushing more and more logic to middlewares. So they sometimes had controller did all the functionality, but it was all completely empty, because like everything was done in the middleware, which I see as an anti-pattern. Because middleware should be something more or less like you should have either for the whole application, or maybe you might have like a set of middlewares for the whole application and some extension part for where the users are signed in. So things related to people being signed in, and the rest should be in controllers. We built something called controller behaviors, which is like controller is taking state, returning state, but basically within the state is request, and it also the state contains response, and the expectation is that you take the request and you turn it into response. You can do other things at the same time, and so that's what controller should do. And we created a flow macro that makes it easy. It looks a bit like maybe monad. So it makes steps of transformation. You can easily plug in sequence of steps, control behavior that expects state, return state, so you can plug it anywhere, and it will work. Actually, for a while, we were really using monads in our controllers. So I remember we edited an article, how are we using monads in our controllers? Then we found that it doesn't work in Clojure. It's not solving anything. It's not making our applications any simpler. Later, we wrote an article why we removed monads from Sierra. Because if your code is not purely functional, you don't need them, and it makes it forces you to wrap it's not Haskell, it's Clojure. The rest of the Clojure is not using monads, so you have to wrap your whole application, all libraries, calls, and everything in certain code. While when you don't do this, you make your code much simpler, but still it's based on our controllers are still based on threading macros, and try to make them as purely functional as possible. So if, for example, there is only one query or a bunch of queries that get data for the template, we can just declare it and some middleware will do it for us. So you could potentially have purely functional controllers, but you don't have to do it this way. And you can always write a query if you need it. Of course, you are doing side effects, but yeah, that's life. Sometimes you have to do one query based on some other query, and you might be mixing it with data from the request, and your models shouldn't ideally know about requests. Models shouldn't know that it's a model for a web app. It shouldn't care. It should be the same model no matter if it's a mobile app, desktop app, or web app. So you have to do some parts in controller. So this is how we achieved it, but I must say there have been many discussions with my colleagues, and each developer would approach this a little bit differently. And for example, I think I was right when I was pushing them not to overuse middlewares. And they were right when they told me that monads are a bad idea, and I didn't listen. And later I said, yeah, you were right all the time.
Yes, I think this is another one of the open problems, in functional web development is what is, especially in Clojure, where it's not, like you mentioned, where it's not Haskell, it's not purely functional. You can do side effects if you want. And so what is the most pragmatic way to go about, separating your pure logic from your side effects? And Biff, of course, has its own approach that I've been experimenting with. And so, it does this. So I have an approach that's kind of sounds similar to what you've mentioned, where, you can declare a query up front, for example, and then your controller function will run with the results of that query. The way I've structured it is it's basically a state machine. Yep. So on top of that, what it does is solves the problem of if you have sort of two steps where you want to do some logic and then have an effect, but then do some more logic, then you can split your function into a state machine with two pure functions in it, and then Biff will sort of wire it up for you. So I've I've sort of arrived at an approach that feels fairly ergonomic and that I've been enjoying. So that I think I probably will bring into Biff core, so to speak, and so that'll be the default way. But I am interested to see how it goes when it hits reality and when other people besides myself try to use it and say, oh, are they like, oh, this is so nice, it makes unit tests easy because it's all just pure functions, or are they like, why can't I just call HTTP/get on something?
Yeah,
Like, well, just because that's not pure, so don't do it.
I think the biggest difference between Clojure and Haskell in this matter is how people use the language. Because you can write Clojure in Haskell-ish way, for example.
Yeah.
And people just they don't do it because so what I found, Clojure developers are very much focused on functions, like what is happening, what is being done. And often I have been part of projects where we just started like working on business logic, what is happening to something, without designing the data structures at all. And just we wanted to get to the procedures that are happening. While I have spent some time focused more on, let's say, Haskell. I like F#, and it's a very different approach. It's where you design your domain, you design your world. You see side effects as something bad. You want to push those side effects as far as possible and make as big part of the application purely functional, and have beautiful transformations of those data structures between each other, which in some ways it might be great, it works. When it compiles, it works. In Clojure, there is no big ceremony around it. You want to get data from file, you serp it. You want to say something, spit it. You want to connect to database, you connect to database. You don't have to tell the compiler, hey, I am connecting to database, so all of this function is dirty now. Because for Clojure, it doesn't matter. It's a dynamic language. In a way, it's a language optimized for people who are doing things to the world. They are changing files. Like you don't use Clojure to calculate something and not even print it because it's a side effect. You want to make a change. So, and I think Clojure developers are very unacademic and very much focused on doing things to the world, changing things. And later, when you see, okay, but now I need a little bit of this stability, you add something like Mali, Clojure spec, prismatic schema. Not many people use it, but some of those to stabilize your domain. But it's exposed after you know what you are doing and you are already providing some value. So, so I think this is the biggest difference. And when you are designing a framework for Clojurists, you need to keep in mind that most of your users are using Clojure not to represent idealized, idealized world in vacuum with optimal physical laws. No, you are slurping files that might be invalid, and you somehow try to parse them, and then you somehow try to save them in the database. And as you run into errors, you solve them as they come, which sounds ugly, but it's very productive, especially with REPL. You might do surprisingly a lot in a very short time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's true. Clojure really is a language for pragmatists, in my opinion. Like you said, I feel like it. Going back, we started talking about invention, right? And I think Clojure is a wonderful language for invention, and Biff also is. That's so. Like I mentioned, I mean, the marketing copy, quote unquote, that I use is for solo developers. But invention is kind of what I have in my mind. like Biff is a framework for inventors, where
Yeah,
you're building something useful, but you also have some amount of interest in new, fancy, weird ways to do things.
absolutely, absolutely. There is another, like, when I contrasted Clojure with Haskell, there is one thing that Clojure has in common with Haskell, is that it gives you a massive freedom in how you express your problem. When you look at Java, C Sharp, Golang,
Yeah.
in those languages, often you have just one way how to express your problem. If not on the one file level, let's say on the design pattern level, you will have certain blocks with certain names. So this is a strategy, this is adapter, this is factory, whatever.
Yeah.
In Haskell, in Clojure, you often have many different ways how to express the same thing, because in Clojure, everything is a function. It might be a function expecting function, a function generating function. It might not have any name, no pattern. You just invent, okay, now I need a function, like I have a higher order function that receives two functions and generates a new function. And you ad hoc create a new pattern that resolves your situation. You might not give it any name, but it works in that context. Which could lead to significantly shorter code, but also much more like reusability and abstraction. So yeah, in other ways, Clojure is more similar to Haskell, which also enables exactly this with different tools, of course.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of freedom to explore, which I appreciate.
Of course, yes. So I have one last question. How can people support you?
Oh, try out Biff, I guess, if it seems like something you might be interested in. Always fun to hear from people using it. I enjoyed a lot at the Clojure Conch. I've been to the past two of them, and both times it's been just tons of fun to just talk to people there who, people who have actually used Biff. Someone mentioned he'd used Biff as the backend for a vending machine for a client project. And I was like, wow,
Really?
that's amazing. Biff is powering vending machines. That's so cool. I mean, man, that's cooler than anything I've built with it. It's just tons of fun. Like the Clojure community is a wonderful community, very tight knit, and it's just been a blast just being part of it and talking to people. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And
Yeah.
see you again.
Yeah, absolutely.